I'm soaring, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. Years on from the oyster and with Russian President Putin. Belarusian Achelnik Alexander Lukashenko is still ready for votes, and with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The sky is the same as that on all channels Żadaya Zustrici and with Putin. And Lukashenko would be ready to talk to Zelensky on a pallet of such an oyster. Moreover, the Belarusian dictator, having read the Ukrainian president's Zalyakov, will give him a coke before the attacks on the Kremlin. And I'm also going to hit the Kremlin on the banks, because there's nothing to be heard there. Unfortunately, Russia has not sold trash to Lukashenko's mind, now to the Alaska summit with the received staff, due to the regulation of guilt. In Ukraine, and Zelensky merged into those not yet adoring in spending Ukraine. Lukashenko's chair is still overgrown with Russian troops on his Dumka. They occupied all the firebrand points in the occupied territories, and gave them a chance to resist. And with such a rank, Ukraine does not have to spend the whole of Ukraine on Russian mines today. Those statements of Lukashenko on himself flogged Putin's turbulence. Let's rise up and declare the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Obviously, it is not up to the Kremlin, replacing the rhetoric by it is clear that before the Russian Federation I called Poporovyak. It is possible to guide the President of the Russian Federation specifically. And laying out in Lukashenko to Moscow is practical to post in similar situations. To demonstrate constructiveness for one side by it is clear that until the completion of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt, and with Zelensky we are ready to meet and Lukashenko on skipping that Azgadi with the Ukrainian president parameters such an oyster. And in my mind, in order to demonstrate to the Ukrainian government, I will decide Moscow's readiness and step on everyday life at the residence of the President of Ukraine, and for the longest hour, not to capitulate to the Kremlin, but extremely on the niche of the word of the Belarusian Chilnik. Even before the Russian troops occupied all the head points in the occupied territories, and then Ukraine is no longer theirs. I am, of course, the American president. On the chair for another 3.5 lessons in Russian-Ukrainian guilt, Russia has not managed to occupy this territory. Anyaki Razrekova Putin. And this, obviously, is a territorial fiasco of mirrors on the prestige of Russia. So Putin and Namagit through Lukashenko. Trump's ropes have not yet been handed over to the widow in the network. So the title was given to special operations, the yaks were put in front of the dropped, and the forces of Russia fierce 2022. Putin, obviously, Razrekova, without greedy problems, occupied the territory of the gathering of Ukraine. And so the famous in Kiev on the puppet Vlad, as she praised the passage to the Russian Federation of the most frequent regions immediately, and the pub of Ukraine. And that often on our power I was overestimated by the management of collaborators, I would pretend to be a new Belarus. To the joy of Lukashenko it sounded. And in those situations extremely. We can't respect yet I'm talking about Lukashenko's positions, even before his oyster with Zelensky. And the words about Russia's positions on oysters from an American, and in Alaska, I'm a real diplomatic sense. Sense on the very demonstration of the readiness of the dropped forces of the Russian Federation was given on Ukrainian territory. The head sense of Ukraine's Zalyakovany is that I will not capitulate yet, not behind the bar. The Ukrainian power will be dismantled to the Russians. Well, we feel those Zelyukhovania, practically since 2014 about. Putin is in a purge, and he also talks about the so-called sovereign turn in Ukraine, and the aggressive ideas of the ruling power. And the army on the workshop ambushes. From the oyster, Russia is still ready to demonstrate to the cordon from Belarus its hybrid guilt of proto-European Ukrainians. For the style of Rasputin, and can pretend to a new stage of confrontation between the Kremlin and the sunset. And the droppings are still frequent on those drones. The eyelids have been snatched to the territory of Poland now. With a memorable attack on the windy stretch of Ukraine, flew from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. I have no doubt that Lukashenko is ready to use his territory as a springboard for new provocations against Poland and the Baltic Ukrainians in the near future. Well, I am not yet ready to provide Putin with his willingness to use both generous and economical propositions. That's how it was negotiated on the oysters of the Russian and Belarusian president. Lukashenko says that with Putin, the parameters for the consumption of Russian gas to Belarus are very wide. We understand that the Belarusian dictator pays his Russian colleagues for the sovereignty of Belarus itself, and the willingness to enter the territory of Ukraine as a springboard for possible new attacks against Ukraine and against neighboring Central Europe. Well, and look out, still sending signals to the view of Putin's name and Namagit sunsets. European presidents in a situation of cola. The Russian president himself keeps silence and does not want to engage in a century of controversy, so it is absolutely obvious that Lukashenko's role is. In Putin's situation, we absolutely do not want to have sex with the American President Donald Trump, because we will become days and days of Trump's harsh rhetoric. Just by Putin joking imperious epithet to Trump. By instructing Lukashenko to talk about the successes of his powerful army and lay into Ukrainians in spending their power. I have not yet capitulated to Moscow. So the sky of surrender is not a waste of the Ukrainian power on two self-proclaimed dictators. The ruling peoples are rotten, and our people love to rot. Diakuyu. Agree on the channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to social on the Patreon and Donatello channel. And YouTube itself helps to develop these resources through the sponsorship function.